is an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.
So good evening to everyone who is joining us from Sydney and around the world. And in today's special episode of Ultimate Global Podcast, we are joined with Patrick Seibt, who is an account executive at GoCardless. And we are going to talk about this interesting topic of the sales strategies to boost your company growth in 2022. And I think this is the year when the lockdowns are getting over, finally, is what we can predict as of now, with fingers crossed. And a lot of countries are also easing down on restrictions, even countries like Australia, New Zealand, which were quite tough on their border rules till last year, have loosened up their restrictions. And that's the time for businesses to think about going global again, thinking about selling their products and services to more countries without any restrictions and without any barriers coming in between. And that's the time for us to also discuss with somebody who is doing sales, who has got sales experience, maybe to share some strategies which can be used by companies for their growth in this year. But before that, would you like to briefly tell more about what you are doing, Patrick, and how we landed up on LinkedIn?
Well, at the moment, I'm working as an account executive at GoCardless, which is a payment service provider. I've a stronger financial services background, meaning I started actually working in retail banking as a personal advisor, later in private banking. And that is when I decided to make the transition to software sales and joined Molly. Molly is by now the third biggest payment service provider in Europe, the third biggest private held payment service provider. And well, now I'm with GoCardless, which is also a payment service provider who's focusing on bank debit payments. Yeah, that is it so far.
That's great to know, Patrick. So, I mean to say, in this year, as we talked about, that this is the year of growth. This is the year where companies are looking for new opportunities in different areas. And as we said before as well, that lockdowns are now coming over, and that's where the companies now see an opportunity to broaden their horizon when it comes to sales and marketing, both the sides. What are some of the top sales strategies that you have been doing in your company, or what you think, as per your perspective, which can be handy for companies in this year?
Interesting question, because I think we all know that social selling, for instance, will grow massively over the next years. And COVID actually just accelerated this development. So what I want to say is that, of course, things like cold emailing and cold calling will always have their place. And I'm a huge cold calling fan myself, so I think it's still the best method to do outbound prospecting. But still, we don't have a lack of information symmetry in the market, right? People can look up everything on the internet. We have no shortage of supply, which means you can choose for various suppliers. You can get all the information you want on the internet. That means actually you will pick the one who actually provides value for you, but also someone who you can trust. And that is where social selling can be very strong and in your favor if you really know how to do it. But still, the typical and old-fashioned methods, like I said before, cold calling, cold emailing, still have their place, and I think they will stay.
Okay, so you say cold calling and social selling, but some of the people who are new to these terms might want to understand more about what is cold calling, because cold calling can be taken in different perspectives. Some people can take cold calling in a different sense. So, what do you mean by exactly cold calling in 2022 and social selling in 2022? But because the meaning of these have also been changing over the years, isn't it?
Yeah, sure. So cold calling usually was actually telemarketing, where you dialed like 100 numbers per hour, have been put through to, let's say, 30% of the people, which allows you to obviously have a high velocity approach, but a very generic way of prospecting, right? Everyone gets the same message. Everyone has the this. Sorry, what I want to say is it's a generic messaging, not very customized, and therefore you will have difficulties to convince people since they know this nowadays. So cold calling actually has to adapt, and that means you have to prepare for it. You have to think how you can add value to your prospect, and you have to clearly focus on your buyer persona, like do you want to sell to, who is the persona in charge who might be interested in it, and what kind of problem does he have which I could solve. And that is how you could prepare for a cold call, and then you can do it like hyper customized. That is the modern approach. But yeah, you should not overdo it with the preparation, since of course time is your most valuable resource. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, of course. So one of the best ways, as you just shared, for the cold calling as well, is to put yourself in the customer's shoes. And a lot of times we discuss this in various team meetings as well. How important it is for you to think how the customer is thinking and empathize well with the customers. How well do you think is this thing going to be important? Showcasing empathy towards your customer and also putting yourself in their shoes to exactly understand what their requirements are and then hit the sales.
I think it depends if you're selling into B2C or B2B, or like if you're selling to private clients, or if it's companies you're selling to. Empathy is very important, especially in let's say low value transactions, where the tickets in which you're selling are not too high stake. But as soon as you're getting into small and medium-sized companies, or even corporate, or even enterprise accounts, empathy is important still, but people are rather focusing on the solution itself and how you can provide some value, right? So I think empathy is important. It's like a standard. It should be default, but it's not a guarantee for your success. That is actually the second point you mentioned, like customizing your approach and really trying to understand the challenges of your customers or prospects to then find a solution for it. That is where the best ones separate from average size people, I think.
Yeah. So, are there any strategies that you think companies can adopt when it comes to putting yourself in the customer shoes? Because whenever we talk about this, there can be different ways and different processes that the companies might have set up for this purpose. One of the ways is, just to have that procedure in place where you first understand the requirements, then tell them about your product and features, and then go forward with the negotiation part and other things which are coming forward. So, do you have any suggestions as to what kind of strategies you might have adopted, and how to cut down on that sales cycle? Because I think that's going to be a major challenge for companies to cut down on the sales cycle. A lot of companies might find it hard to convince their customers as quickly as possible, isn't it?
Also, that depends if you're in what size your accounts are you're selling in. I'm a corporate account executive focusing on companies that make revenue of up to 250 million euros a year. So I've got a quite wide range, and my approach is clearly to do things differently from everybody else. Like this high velocity cold calling approach, for instance, I think it's not feasible nowadays, and it won't get you anywhere. On the other hand, people started using tools like Salesloft or Outreach to build cadences and actually have a sort of generic way of approaching prospects over various days with various means of outreach, like LinkedIn social selling, cold calling, cold emailing, even normal mail. That is something I like to apply, and that is something you should play with. But if I could give one advice to companies, it would clearly be social selling, because what I'm seeing is the salespeople would actually like to social sell and they would like to build a personal brand, but they don't know where to start. And there is somehow maybe afraid of posting because, they've got fear of rejection. But that is something that you should clearly be doing, because this is the first thing that will show up on Google if someone puts in your name, right? Your LinkedIn profile. And that is where you can build trust from the very first second. And it's a game changer for everyone. Still, it's not overused at the moment, quite the opposite. So yeah, that would be my number one advice.
Yeah, these are wonderful insights, Patrick. Another thing which definitely I want to know from you is related to this fact that when you are leading a team, when you are leading a sales team, there are a lot of challenges for you as a manager as well. Coordinating with your team members, making sure that they are hitting the targets, assisting them in understanding if they are going wrong somewhere, and also from a sales team member's perspective, sometimes it can be quite stressful because obviously sales is not at all easy. It's very stressful. You have to go through your tough days as well when you're not getting any leads, when you're not getting any prospects. What's your advice for those kind of days which are really really tough for people, both as a sales manager and also as a sales team member?
Starting as a sales team member, since I'm not a manager myself yet, um, I think it's the worst times where you have to stand out, right? We all know how to be successful, so in good times it's very easy to focus on, let's say, prospecting more, getting more deals in, and keeping a positive mindset. Um, when it's getting more difficult, that is where you really have to focus on your own mindset, where you have to sometimes dig through the hard stages, and where you just um, yeah really need to focus on yourself and how you get to the next level, because usually that is when you grow, and you just should be keeping this in mind, that the hard times are the ones when you actually can achieve newer highs, even if it does not feel like it from a paycheck perspective. But that is my approach. So I could only recommend reading books about mindfulness and mindset to understand yourself. Maybe even about philosophy, just to get to know your enemy, to put it simple.
And are there any books that you would recommend?
Yeah, there is a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck. That is, well, I've read over 50 books last year, mainly nonfiction books, and that is clearly one of my favorites. Also, well, it's not exactly what we spoke about right now, but time is your most valuable resource. I mentioned that in the beginning. And Brian Tracy is maybe the most known and most well-known person when it comes to um, time management and self-organization. And he wrote quite some books which are very interesting, especially for sales reps. Like, how do you use your golden hours, and how do you make sure that you're getting everything done, because it can be overwhelming, especially nowadays. But if I had to recommend two books, it would be Brian Tracy's No Excuses and Carol Dweck's Mindset.
That's great. Definitely, I will be going through these two books after this session. And also from a growth mindset perspective, this is a new term when we are talking about that no matter whichever team you are working in, you should always have a mindset where you want to learn new things, you want to explore new things, be open to new challenges every day, and also get ready to come out of your comfort zone. These are the terms which we keep on listening these days. So, how do you think these things are also relevant for the sales team members in different companies in this year?
Sorry, you mean like keeping a positive mindset, or did I get the question wrong? Could you rephrase it maybe?
Yeah, so what I'm saying basically is that the terms like growth mindset, having a positive mindset to lead your team, to learn new things on a day-to-day basis, to come out of your comfort zone. So these are the things which are getting very popular, not only in sales but across the domains, across different
Yeah.
domains in a company. How do you think this is going to be more relevant for sales team members, to have that growth mindset, have a positive mindset towards whatever they do?
I think it's super important. It always has been. But, well, I think people like to hide behind social selling and email marketing. That is where you actually have to push through your comfort zone, as you put it. And I think within our souls and within ourselves, we all know that cold calling might be the best approach to get a quick answer and to get in contact rather quickly. And also to disqualify early, which then allows you to focus on things which are important to you. And that is why keeping a positive mindset and a growth mindset for yourself is super important. Just so you sometimes you are in your comfort zone and you don't even recognize it because, well, there is a lot of distractions and there is a lot of various ways to prospect, for instance, or to close deals, to do sales itself. And it's easy to find excuses not to do the things you should actually be doing. But if you listen to yourself clearly, you know what has to be done. But it's only possible if you have that mindset to ask yourself the right questions. That is my experience, and it worked out well. So, yeah.
Absolutely, and this might work out for different people who are listening to you at this time or who might be listening to you later. So, another thing is when we divide sales, one part of it we already discussed, and that was, how you're selling the product to the customer. But there is also this prerequisite, which is to first know about the product on your own as a sales team member. Sometimes, as a sales team member, you might not have the complete product knowledge, and when you are in front of a customer and they start asking you a lot of questions, you might not know the answers to those questions because you don't have the complete product knowledge. You have not yet read completely about what your product is, what your market is. I think that's also very important, right? It's just a prerequisite, but I think that is one of the most important things when you're selling a product, knowing about your product, isn't it?
Definitely. You should be convinced yourself of the product. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. If you're not convinced yourself, how could you possibly convince someone else? Um, and always, when I started a new job in sales, I tried to figure out everything I could about the product before I started. And I would be asking my new managers and hiring managers to provide me with the right information so I don't have to start completely cold. And I would recommend that to everyone who's starting in sales, no matter if you're a sales development representative or an account executive or whatsoever. Start early, know your product, and find the specifics about the product that you really believe in your territory. So you can really not only sell it, but convince people that is a good solution.
Yeah. And another major challenge, which I keep on hearing from a lot of people who are in sales is the negotiation part. We have just touched briefly upon that. Negotiation can be in terms of what kind of features your product has, what kind of services you're offering, or what's the price of your product. There is negotiation in each and every element of your sales. It can be natural to some people that they have good negotiation skills, or for some people they learn it over a period of time as and how they grow with the company. What's your advice for some of the people who might be learning negotiation skills or on the base of your experience?
Um, I think negotiation can be rather easy if you prepare the deal in the right way. That means if you make clear how the value is provided and how you actually can solve a problem with your solution, then you can calculate and show for instance, return on invest calculation that shows how it could look like. And that makes the negotiation rather easy because you provided something beforehand. It's getting hard if the customer does not clearly understand how you provide value. That is when negotiation gets really hard because I don't think there is a price low enough that a customer would be paying if he doesn't see the value of it. So that is mainly the basic answer you would get from every sales manager. But it's super true. If you have to negotiate rather hard, that means you have not done your work beforehand.
Absolutely. Looking at another side of the sales, just few more questions before we end today's session. Another side is from a manager's point of view, and that can be another sales strategy. We have talked about pricing, we have talked about negotiation, we have talked about knowing the product fully. Another side is hiring the right people in the sales team. Sometimes You can hire people who are not meant for sales. They might be better in marketing. They might be better in video editing. They might be better in content writing. But it is a possibility that you are choosing the wrong team member at the wrong place. So how should people and managers especially make sure that they're hiring the right people for sales? How to identify those skills? I think that's also important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Hiring managers should be looking at ambition, because I know a lot of people who have not even studied, for instance, who come from various industries and don't have any sales experience, but they make pretty well as an SDR in the beginning and become top performers later. It's a story you hear time and again, and you shouldn't look too closely at the CV, rather on people's ambitions and how they sell themselves. So that is something I would be looking at, and most likely people would be staying in the position they're in if they made clear why they want to join in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
One of the final questions, Patrick, which I would like to ask you, it has been a very insightful session for sure, but also would love to understand from you from the tech side of it. A lot of new companies are using new technologies into sales so that the sales process can become more automated, it can become faster, and they can get their results accurately measured in every month, every quarter, every year. Is there any new sales tool that you have been using or would recommend to use for companies? Any sales tool or tools that you have been using?
I can focus on the German market. Sometimes Germany lags behind in these type of things, but the most interesting tool at the moment, besides Sales Navigator Instant, obviously, is for me SalesLoft or Outreach, because that makes it really, really easy for people who are not that organized themselves to keep structure. But also things like ZoomInfo or Cognism to guarantee that the numbers, the telephone numbers you get, are actually right and up to date. And even there are new tools. I don't use one of it right now, but that would be something that allows you to track the telephone numbers which have a high picking up rate. So you can actually know beforehand if the one who you're going to be calling is picking up the phone or not. That would be the next step for me. But for now, I'd say SalesLoft and ZoomInfo are the most valuable tools.
Yep. Thank you so much for sharing those, exciting tools, which, we would love to try, and everyone would love to try in sales who have not tried it yet. Before we end today's session, would love to ask you any top 2 or 3 sales strategies which you would be recommending from a higher end point of view that the company should adopt for their growth in 2022 to get that exponential growth. Any top 2 or 3 sales strategies coming from you to end the session with?
I don't know if I know 3, but social selling efforts should be increased, definitely. Cold calling should have a revival. I know it's very strong in the US, but it's not too strong in Europe. And I think people should be focusing on that again. And the third point would be use a tech stack of at least 5 to 6 tools and know how to use it, like I mentioned, SalesLoft, etc., to make sure you don't waste time with Excel or CSV sheets.
Yep. So here you are. There are so many tips shared by Patrick on the basis of his experience, including social selling, cold calling, and so many different things that we just discussed in this session. And I hope that it was quite insightful for the people who will be listening to this session. And if you have any feedback for Ultimate Global Podcast or any topics that you want us to discuss in the future sessions, we would definitely love to know from you. And thank you so much, Patrick, for taking out your time today to join us for this session.
Thanks for having me.
This is an Ultimate Global Podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.